The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I'm Deborah Seymour, Associate Director of the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning at the 92nd Street Y. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you this evening to a very special panel with our prolific guests, Natalie Angier, Hope Edelman, Pam Houston, Vivian Gornick, and Cathi Hanauer, and their well-known moderator, Dr. Dale Atkins. We are especially pleased to welcome our guests as speakers in our prestigious Ruth and Oliver Stanton About Women program. Mrs. Stanton's deep interest in women's issues forms the core support for this series. Please be sure to attend some of our other exciting upcoming About Women lectures, featuring Dorothy Allison with Laurie Stone, among others. We thank the Stanton family for their ongoing and generous support of the Y and its lectures. Dr. Dale Atkins is a licensed psychologist who has more than 25 years of experience as a relationship expert, focusing on families, couples, parenting, aging well, and stress management. An author of several books, articles and journals for popular and professional audiences, Dr. Atkins has a private practice in New York City and is a much sought-after lecturer and keynote speaker, as well as a frequent media expert on such well-known shows as Today and Good Morning America. Tonight, the dialogue between our guests and moderator focuses on the topic of women, reflections on sex, solitude, work, motherhood, self-esteem, and the state of women today. This evening's format will be as follows. Dr. Atkins will introduce our esteemed guests, and the panel discussion will then proceed for about 45 minutes. A half-hour question and answer period will follow the discussion, during which Dr. Atkins will take questions from the audience and direct them to our guests. A book signing follows the question and answer period in the lobby right outside this auditorium. And now, please join me in welcoming our very popular moderator, Dr. Dale Atkins.
Good evening. We'll just get ourselves settled. First of all, I'd like to say how honored I am to moderate such an illustrious panel. And quite frankly, I'm a little uncomfortable standing here so that we can have a discussion. I'd actually like to join you at the table, which I will do when we start our discussion, so that it really can be that. And we will be discussing, well, first of all, we'll be hearing from our panel, and we'll be hearing them read from their essays, and then we'll be asking questions. I'll be asking questions, and we'll invite you to ask questions as well. This book, The Bitch in the House, is a book in which the writers share their very personal journeys about confronting and thank you, Vivian. Their very personal journeys about how they're confronting and dealing with the challenges of life. And they're writing about letting go of dreams that are based on fantasy and creating dreams based on what is, the reality and the truths of their lives. Each of these writers writes about finding a place to fortify ourselves as the reader, to fortify ourselves and to restore ourselves and to really know ourselves and to allow our own truths to emerge and not be afraid of the changing truths in our lives and sometimes living with many truths simultaneously. We learn that whatever choices, we are responsible for ourselves and our own destinies, and all meaningful decisions bring hard work, and each choice brings with it a certain amount of anguish. Who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I become the person I want to be? And how do I live my life? As a psychologist, I've worked with many people conflicted about their roles in the workplace, at home, as daughters, as mothers, as wives. And one of my jobs is to help people search deeply into themselves and figure out what is right for them. This book, The Bitch in the House, really helps readers to explore certain important and psychologically meaningful questions about themselves and helps them to find a personal point of balance. This book was put together by Cathi Hanauer, who's sitting right here to my left. And Cathi is the author of the novel My Sister's Bones and has written articles, essays, reviews, and fiction for many magazines, among them Elle, Mirabella, Self, Glamour, and Mademoiselle. She has written the monthly book column for both Glamour and Mademoiselle and was the relationships advice columnist for 17 magazine for 7 years. She lives in Western Massachusetts with her husband, who is a writer, Daniel Jones, and their son and their daughter. And I'm going to sit down next to Pam, and I'm going to ask Cathi to think about my first question as I walk over there, which is, I'd like you to tell us how the book emerged. You say it was born out of anger, how you chose the contributors, 4 of whom are here with us, and what surprised you about this book as it came together. So let me think about that as I come over near you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. I think the book came to be because I was in my mid-30s and I had everything I'd ever wanted and worked hard to accomplish. I had a good career that I was proud of, a great husband, 2 great little children, and yet I found myself, rather than just being able to appreciate my life, constantly overwhelmed by the juggling act that my life had become. I was trying to fit the pieces together. I was often just exhausted and overwhelmed and stressed, and I was becoming the bitch in the house. I began to speak to friends about this and other writers I knew and other people I knew, and found that many women, particularly those who were juggling careers and small children, felt similarly. So I started to get the idea to put together a book about this. I wanted it to be a literary book with great writing, and I thought that it should include women of all ages and all circumstances and situations, talking about choices they'd made and what was working and what in this post-feminist contemporary society was still not. I went to, first, my good friends who were writers, novelists, and asked them if they were interested in contributing to this, and many of them are in the mommy maddest section. And they all seemed interested. So I got together a group, and I got a contract for the book, and then I began to approach other writers whose work I'd always loved, and most of whom are sitting here. Vivian I knew from a long time back, but Natalie and Hope and Pam. And I just basically approached these women and begged them to write for the book. And we talked about topics that might work for them. And in the third case, I knew there were certain topics I wanted to get into this book, one of which was the topic of open marriage. One was what it felt like to be an overweight woman in today's society. Certain issues I wanted covered, and in those cases I went to, I asked around until I found writers in those situations and approached them and asked if they'd be willing to write about it. And I think your third question was about were there any surprises?
Yes.
One surprise, I think, for me was the importance of women's mothers, the women's mothers in the book, and I think you may talk about that later. So many of the women talked about their mothers, whether, as you put it, they put them on a pedestal or were, I guess, condemning them or didn't want to idolize them, but it just was a huge issue for so many contemporary women. What had their mothers been? What were they trying to do the same thing? And I know it was for me too. I think my mother raised 4 children and was at home during those years, and I was working, and I was constantly comparing myself and sort of trying to figure out how to do it. So that was one surprise.
Thank you. What I'd like to do now is ask each of the participants to read a section from her essay, And then at the conclusion of everyone's reading, we will discuss the book more fluidly. Our first reader is Hope Edelman, and Hope is the author of 3 nonfiction books, including Motherless Daughters, which was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and the overwhelming number of letters that she received in response to Motherless Daughters prompted her to publish Letters from Motherless Daughters. And at the age of 30, she began an informal movement consisting of motherless women from all over the world and has helped women to heal by helping them to understand the impact of their loss as well as the healing process. And Hope has been acclaimed as a writer who brings, and I quote, fresh insights into female family relationships, which is also evident in Mother of My Mother, where she helps the readers to understand and celebrate the women who came before them and to illuminate the past for the daughters who follow. Hope is the recipient of the Pushcart Prize for Creative Nonfiction, and her essays have appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the San Francisco Chronicle, Self, Glamour, Child, and 17. She lives in Los Angeles with her 2 daughters, and she is an associate faculty member at Antioch University in Los Angeles. So Hope, would you read a piece from your essay, and would you mind also telling us the name of the essay?
Sure. Thank you very much. The title of my essay is The Myth of Co-Parenting, and it chronicles... It gets better than that. It chronicles the 2 years that my husband was starting an internet company, and he was part of that .com craze. The title that I originally floated past Cathi was I Was a .com Mom, but we settled on the myth of co-parenting instead. Throughout much of 1999 and 2000, my husband spent quite a lot of time at work. By quite a lot, I mean the kind of time Fermilab scientists spent trying to split the atom, which is to say, every waking moment. The unofficial count one week came in at 92 hours, which didn't include cell phone calls answered on grocery checkout lines or middle-of-the-night brainstorms that had to be emailed before dawn. Often I would wake at 3 a.m. and find him editing a business plan down in the living room, drinking herbal tea in front of his laptop's ethereal glow. If he had been a lawyer tallying billable hours, he would have made some firm stinking rich. He was launching an internet company back then, and these were the kind of hours most people in his industry were putting in. Phrases like window of opportunity and ensuring our long-term security were bantered around our house a lot, usually during the kind of exasperating late-night conversations that began with, "The red-eye to New York again?" and included, "I mean, it's not like you're trying to find a cure for cancer," somewhere within. I was working nearly full-time myself, though it soon became clear this would have to end. Our daughter was 1.5 years old, and the phrase functionally orphaned was also getting thrown around our house a lot, usually by me. So as my husband's work hours exponentially increased, I started cutting back on mine. First a drop from 35 per week to 25, and then a dwindle down to about 18. At first, I didn't really mind. With the exception of 6 weeks postpartum, this was the first time since high school I had good excuse not to work like a maniac, and I was grateful for the break. Still, there was something more than vaguely unsettling about feeling that my choice hadn't been much of an actual choice. When one parent works 92 hours a week, the other one, by necessity, has to start picking up the slack. Otherwise, some fairly important things, like keeping the refrigerator stocked or filing income taxes or finding a reliable babysitter, not to mention giving a child some semblance of security and consistency around this place for God's sake, won't get done. A lot of slack was starting to pile up around our house, and because I was the only parent spending any real time there, the primary de-slacker was me. Like virtually every woman friend I have, I entered marriage with the belief that co-parenting was an attainable goal. In truth, it was more of a vague assumption, a kind of imagined parody I had superimposed on the idea of marriage without ever really thinking it through. If I'm going to contribute half of the income, then he'll contribute half of the housework and childcare, something like that. If you'd asked me to elaborate, I would have said something impassioned and emphatic using terms like shared responsibility and equal division of labor. The watered-down version of feminism that I identified with espoused those phrases, and in lieu of a more sophisticated blueprint for domestic life, I just co-opted the talk as my own. But really, I didn't know what I was talking about beyond the fact I didn't want to be the dominant parent in the house. When I was growing up in suburban New York, my mother seemed to do everything. Carpooling, haircuts, vet appointments, ice cream cakes, dinner in the crock pot, book report dioramas, the whole roll call for a housewife of the 60s and 70s. My father, from my child's point of view, did three things. He came home from work in time for dinner. He sat at the kitchen table once a month and paid the bills. And on weekend trips, he drove the car. Certainly, he did much more than that, but my mother's omnipresence in our household meant that anyone else felt incidental in comparison. The morning after she died of breast cancer at 42, my younger siblings and I sat at the kitchen table with our father as dawn filtered through the yellow window shades. I looked at him sitting there in a polo shirt and baseball cap, suddenly so small beneath his collapsed shoulders. I was barely 17. He was 51. Huh, I thought, who are you? There were no chore charts taped to the refrigerator, no family powwows, no enthusiastic TV nannies suddenly materializing outside our front door. My father taught himself to use a microwave, and I started driving my siblings for their haircuts, and that, as they say, was that. When John, my husband, then became so scarce around our house years later, I had to compensate by being an utterly present parent in every way. As a kisser of boo-boos, a dispenser of discipline, an employer of babysitters, an assembler of child furniture, a scary monster slayer, mortgage refinancer, reseeder of dying backyards. And that's before I even opened my office door for the day. Balancing act, I was the whole damn circus, all three rings. How does it happen, I wondered both then and now, that even today, in this post-second wave, post-superwoman, dual-income society we live in, the mother nearly always becomes the primary parent, even when she too works full-time, the one who meets most or all of the children's and the household's minute-by-minute needs. We start out with such grand intentions for sharing the job, yet ultimately how many fathers handle the dental appointments, shop for school clothes, or shuttle pets to and from the vet? 9 times out of 10, it is still the mother who plans and emcees the birthday parties, the mother who cuts the meeting short when the school nurse calls. Women have known about this second shift for years, the way the workday so often starts up again when they walk through the door at the end of the workday. Still, I had naively thought that a pro-feminist partner, plus my own sheer willpower, would prevent this from happening to me. I hadn't bargained for how deeply the gender roles of nurturer and provider are ingrained in us, or no matter how much I love being a mother to my daughter, how much I would grow to resent them. When it became clear that my husband and I were not achieving the kind of cold parenting I'd so badly wanted us to achieve, I felt duped and infuriated and frustrated, and beneath it all, terribly, impossibly sad. Sad for myself and sad for my daughter, who, just like me as a child, had so little one-on-one time with her father. No matter how sincerely John and I tried to buck convention, no matter how often I was the one who sat down at the kitchen table to pay the bills, there we were, he absorbed in his own world of work, me consumed by mine at home, my parents all over again.
Thank you. Natalie Angier. Natalie attended the University of Michigan and graduated from Barnard College magna cum laude in English with minors in physics and astronomy. At age 22, she was hired as a founding staff member for Discover, the science magazine which was launched by Time Incorporated. As a writer for the Times, which she is now, and I'm sure all of you are reading her, she has written also for most major women's magazines and other publications, as well as Atlantic, Parade, Washington Monthly, Fox TV Network, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. She's the author of Natural Obsessions, which examines cancer research, The Beauty and the Beastly, and Woman and Intimate Geography, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and was a New York Times bestseller. She received a Pulitzer Prize for beat reporting for her work at the New York Times, and other honors include the American Association for the Advancement of Science Award for Excellence in Journalism, the General Motors International Biomedical Journalism Prize for Outstanding Media Coverage of Cancer, 4 New York Times Publishers Award, and the Barnard College Distinguished Alumni Award. Ms. Angier lives in Maryland with her husband, Rick Weiss, and their 6-year-old daughter, Catherine. Would you read from your piece, and would you tell us the title?
Okay.
Thanks.
Just to show you how long it takes to get a book published. In this one, my daughter is 4, so. The Origin, Procreation, and Hopes of an Angry Feminist. One morning, my 4-year-old daughter, Catherine, donned the mantle of Freud and drew a telling picture of me. She started with the usual details, the wild foam of hair, the hands and feet with each twig-like finger and toe carefully delineated, the belly button, the 2 boobs with their bullseye nipples. But then she added a couple of new elements. She drew big tears dripping from my eyes and a thought balloon above my head, with another figure inside it lying prone. I asked her to explain. "You're crying because you're so upset about the news," she said, and I was indeed visibly and raucously distressed by what I had been reading in the newspaper, specifically that our newly anointed president, planned to reinstate the old Reagan gag rule forbidding any international family planning organization that receives American aid from so much as lip-syncing the word abortion. And the figure in the balloon? "That's President George Bush," said Catherine. "You're wishing that he was dead." Now more than ever. After laughing with surprise, not to mention maternal pride in an offspring's cleverness, I hugged her close and insisted that I didn't want George W. Bush to die. I merely wished that he wasn't president. "Your mother is a crank, isn't she?" I said, "always mad and complaining, right?" She shrugged against my hug, so what else is new? I hugged her tighter and said, "But you're going to be a good little revolutionary, aren't you? A fighter for the cause?" At which point she pushed me away impatiently. She's never been a huggy-kissy kind of child, and besides, she wanted to keep drawing, not yakety-yakking. And it's true, I'm a crank by avocation and provocation. I luxuriate in indignation. It feels so righteous. Every morning at the breakfast table, I read, or rather jackhammer, the newspaper, stopping often to share fragments of my disgust, incredulity, rage, and despair with that captive audience otherwise known as my family. In fact, in recognition of my filibustering skills, my husband actually found me a genuine soapbox to stand on. I complain about many, many things, from the fragile state of our mother Gaia to the laughable state of our mother effing government, but the issue that has obsessed me the longest and set me ranting the loudest is feminism. And I'm an unrepentant advocate of women's rights, one of those creatures that Rush Limbaugh calls feminazi. In fact, he did once call me a feminazi. I was so proud. From the moment I was aware of being female, I realized that girls and women inexplicably were considered imperfect goods. As a young bookworm in the 1960s, I noticed that the books I read in school and out featured far more tales of boys than they did of girls, and that is still true, I might add. I saw that men got to do all the fun things in life, fly to the moon, and utter awkwardly exalted and notably female-free lines about small man steps and giant mankind steps, while the closest women got to outer space was in commercials for Comet. Well, this sucks, I thought to myself. Why couldn't I have been born a boy? I remember getting into an argument with my friend Cheryl in the 2nd or 3rd grade. "I wish I were a boy," I said. "Don't you?" "No," she replied. "I like being a girl." "You like being a girl?" I said. "How can you like being a girl?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her decidedly girlish blonde curls. "I just do." I refused to back down. "Well, what part do you like? Wearing dresses that fly up when you're in the playground so your underwear shows? Being told to act like a lady, or not being allowed to do stuff because you're a girl?" "I just enjoy being a girl," she said firmly. "I'm sorry, Natalie, I don't feel the way you do, and I don't want to quarrel about it anymore." And she actually used words like quarrel because she was the daughter of a minister. Deciding that my best friend was lying, blind, stupid, or some combination of the three, I retreated to another part of Cheryl's room and waited in sullen enemy for my mother to come fetch me home. Throughout my life, it's often seemed that feminism was the only thing that mattered, and to be honest, it has not made my life very happy. I have felt disenfranchised, marginalized, perpetually disappointed. Throughout the years, I've lost many a female friend over the issue of feminism, or rather my rendering of it. My girlfriends simply have not cared enough about feminism to suit me. Most of them wouldn't have even called themselves feminists. They don't even see it as a betrayal of the cause to allow men to take them out for dinner and pay the bill rather than splitting the tab, which I was religious about. They didn't like calling men and asking them out for dates, which I would do sort of on principle. And my girlfriends were really non-committal about the whole friendship business, and I wanted these profound friendships, glorious friendships, friendships that fatten the spirit and sharpen the mind. I wanted a friendship like that between my heroines Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I pined for that sort of gynocentricity, but I never found it. The one woman I have been able to count on over the years, whose feminism and commitment to the revolution have never flagged, is my mother, who is in this audience. I can say anything to my mother, bitch, thunder, clap, trap, against all the world's misogynies and idiocies, and she doesn't recoil from me or roll her eyes or say, I don't want to quarrel, Natalie, but I don't agree with you. She's a warrior as I am, and though she's always been a lot peppier and less gloomy about the future, she still believes in the fight. And lately I've been seized with fear about what am I going to do when she dies, which won't happen for a long time, but anyway, who will I kvetch to? Which brings me to the subject I began with, my daughter, Catherine. My poor, brilliant, beautiful daughter, she is doomed. My daughter, I pray, will take up the feminist torch and whip its flame higher and brighter than I ever could. I don't want her to be like me, not at all. I don't want her to be angry about the world and its injustices. I don't want her to carry a checklist wherever she goes and be embittered by the male-female ratios she finds. At the same time, I don't want her to take her liberty for granted or view feminism as some kind of mildewed history of no more relevance to her life than a horse-drawn barouche or a manual typewriter. I really relish the line in a letter that Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote saying about giving birth to her 5th child, a girl. I am at length the happy mother of a daughter. Rejoice with me, all womankind, for lo, a champion of the cause is born. Sure enough, Harriet Stanton became a defender of the cause and a fighter for suffragism and women's rights. Did Harriet have a chance? Does Catherine? I predict that my daughter will resist the imposition, and rightly so. She's not here to entertain me or shore me up or listen to my serial hour sermonettes. I want her to be a warrior, a champion of the cause, and I feel as proud as a mighty blue she-whale, the largest animal ever to grace this planet, should my daughter choose to call herself a feminist. Yet I want her to be a feminist without the litmus paper, the indignation, and the barbed wire. A feminist with close friends who aren't kin. A feminist without portfolio, if you will, and a citizen of the world.
Thank you. You probably can see why I'm in my 4th reading of the book. Vivian Gornick. Vivian is the author of 8 books and has been called one of the most vital and indispensable essayists of our cultural moment. Her memoir, Fierce Attachments, is a classic exploration of her relationship with her mother, and the essay collection's Approaching Eye Level explores how we can come to know ourselves only by participating in the world. In it, she explores the fear of loneliness and the search for self-knowledge. Vivian also wrote The End of the Novel of Love, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her writing has appeared in such publications as the New York Times, Sunday Magazine, and Ms. She was a staff writer for The Village Voice and co-editor of Woman in Sexist Society. Her newest book, which grew out of 15 years of teaching nonfiction writing, is The Situation and the Story, The Art of Personal Narrative, and Vivian lives in New York City. Would you be kind enough to read? Thank you.
Yes. My piece is called What Independence Has Come to Mean to Me. So it's a kind of a recital of why I am where I am, which is a change rung on the register being worked here. It's Sunday morning, and I'm walking up Columbus Avenue. Couples are coming at me on all sides. They fill the street from building line to pavement edge. Some are clasped together, looking raptly into each other's faces. Some are holding hands, their eyes restless, window shopping. Some walk side by side, stony-faced, carefully not touching. I have the sudden conviction that half these people will, in a few months, be walking with someone else, now walking on the avenue as one half of another couple. Eventually, that arrangement will terminate as well, and each man and each woman will once again be staring out the window of a room empty of companionship. This is a population in a permanent state of intermittent attachment. Inevitably, the silent apartment lies in wait. Who could ever have dreamed there would be so many of us floating around? Those of us between 35 and 55 who live alone. 30 years of politics in the street opened a door that became a floodgate, and we have poured through in our monumental numbers, in possession of the most educated discontent in history. Yet we seem puzzled, most of us, about how we got here, confused and wanting relief from the condition. We roam the crowded streets in naked expectation of the last-minute reprieve. I wrote these paragraphs 8 or 9 years ago. They were the beginning of an essay called On Living Alone. In a certain sense, I had come to realize I'd written often about living alone because I couldn't figure out why I was living alone. Now in this essay, I rehearsed as honestly as I could the history of my own solitary condition. I spoke about how I had married young, felt subsumed in marriage, and taken flight, discovered first the pleasures of solitude and the promise of revolutionary feminism, and then the loneliness that came with what I took to be independence. I also wrote of the romance I had made out of that loneliness, turning it quickly into a political position. This is what we must endure to become ourselves, as well as the wisdom I acquired slowly and unwillingly when I faced up not to the lie, but to the half-truth at the heart of that romance. Inclined by nature toward polemics, and now on the barricades for radical feminism, it had been easy for me to make a simple article of faith out of living alone. But the reality turned out to be less than simple. The reality was that I was alone not because of my politics, but because I did not know how to live in a decent way with another human being. In the name of equality, I tormented every man who'd ever loved me until he left me. I called them on everything, never let anything go, held them up to accountability in ways that wearied us both. There was, of course, more than a grain of truth in everything I said, but those grains, no matter how numerous, need not have become the sand pile that crushed the life out of love. Suppressing the contradictions of what I was actually experiencing, I began to feel bad. The worse I felt, the more polemical I became. I found myself trapped inside my own rhetoric, imprisoned by a flash of insight that had congealed into dogma. Some years later, I wrote another piece in which I spoke even more openly about the divided feeling behind my position sentences. Work I had once written had come to seem everything, the element of life I had determined to no longer live without. Loving a man I had decided would never again be uppermost in my concerns. Now, in this piece, entitled What Feminism Means to Me, I examined the matter once more, and this time looked a bit more clearly at the consequence of what I so easily claimed could be dispensed with. Love, that is. This piece had grown out of years of struggling to look ever more closely at the truth of some of my actual experience. As, for instance, the following. I was in love with the feminist community, yet I found myself bored and irritated by the conversation of more than half my sisters. I claimed work was everything, yet was unable to cure myself of a crippling self-doubt that year after year allowed me to remain largely unproductive. I had, in the midst of feminism's long struggle for legal abortion, had an abortion myself and had been startled to feel myself gripped by a primitive sense of dread at what I was doing. Known as a liberated woman, I had affairs with men who shared my politics, yet in love, it was I who remained fantasy-ridden, needy, passive, belligerent, and distinctly self-involved. In short, I came over the years to see that no matter what my choice, whatever I said yes or no to, the decision was complicated not only by the externals of my situation, but by inner divisions of my own that repeatedly took me by surprise. No choice was ever without serious contradiction or regret on my part. Not because I was a consciously dishonest or falsely, did I say with? No choice was ever without. Yeah. Serious contradiction or regret on my part. Not because I was a consciously dishonest or falsely motivated person, but because I did not know myself well enough to understand the depth of my own anxiety. I seemed unable to both work and love at the same time. It was always one or the other, to see that what I was calling my choices weren't really choices at all. They were simply the impulses of a conflicted being. One of them had to be acted upon. And thus, more often than not, after I had chosen, I'd end up feeling stranded, confused and disappointed, surprised it was all turning out this way. And as shut up inside myself as before, neither free nor independent. There was the rub, not independent. Consciously, I was undivided in my desire for autonomy. Independence, I thought, was what I valued above all else. But it was turning out that I had not understood the meaning of the word at all. For years, I had mistaken rebelliousness for independence. I thought that every time I treated the man in my life badly because work comes first, quote unquote, I was asserting my independence. I thought dressing like a depressed slob meant defying the social code. I thought reciting the history of women's oppression ad nauseum explained all the writing I wasn't doing. What I didn't understand was that the kind of independence I'm talking about is not a thing one demands or pleads for, but a thing one earns. Not a gift granted, but a condition pulled out of one's own reluctant self. Not a passive, but an active state of being. As Chekhov said, others made me a slave, but I must squeeze the slave out of myself, drop by drop. Which I interpret to mean, you work hard to acquire self-knowledge so that you may look directly at the cards that life has dealt you and learn to play them rather than regret them, thereby giving yourself the greatest single strength a human being can possess, knowing what you can live with and what you can't live with, and why. That I came to realize is my notion of independence. So where does this leave me? Where does it leave all of us? Living in a just and benevolent world where all wounds and deprivations stem only from our own neurotic and childish selves? Hardly. The dissatisfactions of women as women are very real. Our unhappiness at having been born into the wrong sex has risen to crisis levels every 50 years for the past 200. I count myself lucky to have come into my maturity during a time when the second wave of American feminism was rising steadily, because it deepened my understanding of myself as a person born into the wrong sex. Feminism clarified immensely the lifelong task of sorting out what is me, what is the world, what is being done to me, what am I doing to myself? Though feminism hasn't, alas, solved my contradictions, the need for companionship in conflict with the need to begin and end with myself, it has allowed me to spend my life exploring them, analyzing them, making ever better sense of them. How impossible it would have been to live my life only 50 years ago, and what a privilege it has been to live it now. To be alive in times that make room for me and my kind, women living out the conflicts rather than the fantasies. Times that allow us to struggle actively with ourselves in order that we may become ourselves. Times that I and my generation of feminists helped create. Mine is a life that embodies an extraordinary education, the one that comes with living out the discrepancy between the cocky, hard-edged declarations made from the barricades and the shocking reality of doing daily battle with one's own self-ignorance. This, for me, is the true exhilaration of revolutionary rage, the one that leads to independence. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Houston. After graduating in English from Denison University in Ohio, Pam rode across Canada on a bicycle and then south to Colorado, where she worked at various odd jobs, among them bartender and flagwoman in a highway crew. She has worked as a hunting guide in Alaska and a river guide out west. She teaches at many writing conferences and programs in the United States and England, and is director, as well as tenured professor, at the Master of Fine Arts program at the University of California at Davis. She is the author of 2 collections of linked stories, Cowboys Are My Weakness, and which won the Western States Book Award, and Waltzing the Cat, which was awarded the Willa Award for Contemporary Fiction, and also a collection of autobiographical essays, A Little More About Me. She edited Women on Hunting, Essays, Fiction, and Poetry, and wrote the text for Men Before 10 a.m., a book of photographs by the French photographer Véronique Vial. Her work has appeared in many magazines and anthologies, most recently O Magazine, and most notably the O. Henry Prize Stories and Best American Short Stories of the Century. She is currently at work on a novel, Sighthound, and she has just finished her first stage play. Her nonfiction has appeared in the New York Times, Elle, and Vogue, and she has published fiction recently in Plowshares, Cutbank, and Other Voices. Pam lives in Colorado at the headwaters of the Rio Grande. Would you read the name of it?
Yes,
Thank you.
I will. My essay is called The Perfect Equality, excuse me, The Perfect Equality of Our Separate Chosen Paths. And that was Cathy's title, as I recall. And I'm just going to read, it's a conversation I'm having with myself about whether or not, as I approach 40, to have a child or adopt a child. And I'm just going to read 2 moments from that conversation. I did 3 things immediately when I came home from the post office and found the note from Randy, my fiancé, that said he had left me, that said, "Don't try to contact me ever again," that said, "I really did love you, Randy." I made an appointment with my therapist. I wrote to the Chinese embassy to ask for a visa that would allow me to go to Tibet. And I went to my favorite bookstore to purchase a book on international adoption. They were the first 3 things I could think of, things that I had expressly not been doing because I feared Randy would find them threatening, and I was trying stupidly in those days, above all else, not to threaten Randy. The shelves in the bookstore were teeming with adoption assistants. Staring out at me in bold black and yellow was the title, Adoption for Dummies. What can they be thinking? I said to the sales clerk. You don't understand, she said. It's part of a series. But I did understand. Computers, maybe, I said. Winemaking, feng shui, I said. But not this. When she was gone, I hid the dummies book behind all the others. Weighed a book in my hand on international adoption, took it to the counter, and purchased it without once cracking open the cover. It was our 3rd day in Laos's northernmost region, and about the 30th village in which we stopped. The woven huts sat quiet, bleaching in the sun, pigs rooted around in the bushes. A couple of turkeys pecked in the dirt. In the late morning air there hung the scent of wood smoke, and just under that the sweeter, thinner smell of burning opium. There are 68 different minority groups in Laos, and our guide, Zai, was bent on Randy and me meeting at least one person from each group. We stood around in the dirt yard waiting for something to happen. An old woman, her teeth stained with betel nut, came to her door and peered out at us. Then 3 little boys exploded out the door around her, tumbling out into the courtyard, more like puppies than kids. There was one in particular. He wore a red shirt embroidered with Buddhism's 8 auspicious signs, and a gray striped cloth tied around his waist like a sarong. He had a round face and huge dimples, a broad nose and deep, intelligent eyes, short black hair and straw sandals. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me, struck a pose, and flashed me a smile like he was Miss America and I was Bert Parks. He was no more than 4 years old.
I offered a greeting in what I hoped was the correct one of the 68 languages, and he offered it back, perhaps imitating my accent just a bit. His smile broadened further. He pointed to my camera, and I raised it and shot. The other kids tried to get his attention, but his gaze never left my face. Already, Zai was herding us back toward our van. I have read plenty of accounts of child napping, of barren women so overcome by desire at the sight of a child that they snatch the baby and go hurtling off down the shopping aisle, through the airport terminal, along the flower-lined streets of Disneyland. Until that moment, I had always thought those women were of some species so apart from me and my experience that they may as well have been the stuff of fairy tales. More and more children poured out into the yard, at least 4 or 5 for every hut, I found myself thinking. The smiling boy still contemplated me as I walked backward toward the road, and then the unconscionable thoughts began. Would his absence lighten the burden of poverty? Is he destined, like so many villagers, for a future laced with opium? Is he destined to have a future at all? I sat heavily in the back seat of the car and rolled down the window. Still, he watched me. I tried to guess how many of the children were his brothers and sisters. It wouldn't matter if there were 100, I knew. That little boy would surely be missed. I waved to him and he waved back. Both Zai and Randy were completely oblivious to how my life had just changed. I would not grab the boy and run down the dirt road with him. I would not presume to believe that I could make a better life for him than he was having in Laos's Golden Triangle. But if his mother had been watching through the window, if she had looked in my eyes and seen what was true, if she had come out of the house and asked me how much I would pay, or if she had come out of the house and put his hand in mine and said, "He go to America and grow big and strong," or if the old woman in the doorway had said, "Such a pity, both parents dead and not enough food to feed all of them," there wouldn't have been the slightest hesitation from me. The van started and we rumbled away from the village. I keep that photo in my wallet like a prayer. And then there are the days when I simply love my life, my dogs, my friends, my freedom. I love being able to get on an airplane with a name printed on the nose in some language I can't begin to decipher, and know that when the plane touches down again, I'm going to be in a world different than any I have ever seen before. Bolivia, Tibet, Antarctica, or Bhutan. I love not caring what food I eat or how sick I get or whether or not the whole country goes on strike and I have no idea when I'll ever get home. I love staying up all night to write if the spirit moves me. I love playing the role of good parent with my students, of believing in their abilities completely, of helping them to believe they can be anything they want. I love sitting around the table with writers and poets when the room smells like scotch and cigarettes and the conversation moves farther and farther away from anything anybody would want their children to hear. I ran into Cathi, an old college friend, at the Pete's Coffee and Tea near my house. We were English majors at Denison University together, had almost the same birthday. We both went west to find ourselves after school. She was there with her youngest son, his brother off in first grade, and as I flew in the door between a morning of writing and an afternoon of teaching, she sat in the sun helping her son feed muffin crumbs to the birds with a look on her face and a posture in her body that said, "I might just sit here all afternoon." I took the time to sit with them for a minute. She bemoaned the fact that she was almost 40 and felt she should have done more with her life. I said I often wondered if I should have done less. When we parted, I wrote her number on the back of a Parisian optician's card I had in my wallet. She wrote my number on the back of a year-long membership to the local petting zoo. I said, "Well, that just about sums it up, doesn't it?" And later I worried that it might have sounded snotty, when what I was really feeling was the perfect equality of our separate chosen paths. We both envied the other's life, both felt we had missed out somehow, and yet neither of us could or would think of trading. On the way home, it occurred to me that nothing on earth was stopping either of us from venturing down the path not taken. I eyed the international adoption book on the shelf when I got home.
Thank you. Thank you all. I have so many questions. I have questions for all of you. I have questions for each of you. How did you pick that topic? You were asked to write about something, and how did you know that that's what you were going to write about? How did you decide on that very topic? Pam?
Cathi called me and left it pretty open for me.
Cathi called me.
Yes, that's the answer. Cathi called me. But she left it pretty open. She said, are you thinking about anything that might apply? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about this. I was 39, I guess, when she called me, and I was thinking, this is the time to make this decision. And I knew I had the essay in me, mm-hmm. so I wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we all can begin. Cathi called me, and I guess each of us thought about, well, what exactly would be on my mind at this point or this place in life. And for me, this was it. I didn't have anything to say about these other elements of life, but the question that I address here is an ongoing one in my life and in life and in our current history. So that was how I came about.
Natalie?
Cathi emailed me.
Phone number. That's fine.
This is just something I think about all the time. I think
Mm-hmm.
about my daughter's future all the time, and it includes how she's going to be politically, and what choices she'll make, and whether I'll be happy with them or not, or whether I'll be able to accept them regardless of what they are.
Mm-hmm.
When Cathi contacted me, I had just finished making a list called the top 10 ways you know you're a .com mom, and had run it by my husband just, because we were trying to find humor in our situation. It had items like number 3, you've used the Allen wrench 4 times in the past week. Number 5, 6 months ago, you didn't know what an Allen wrench was. And it was on my mind, but I was still very angry. And my first draft was very, very different than the final draft that appears in this book. I only read up to a certain point in the essay because there isn't much more of an arc. And it chronicles a very brief period in my marriage that thankfully is in the past. But it was something I was still very angry and upset about, and felt that I needed to work through it, and I needed to work through it by writing about it, and Cathi was in great support of that.
Mm-hmm. And you wrote about co-parenting, so is it a possibility? Is it desirable? Is it what you hope for?
Well, that's an interesting question. I actually know very few couples that can split parenting right down the middle, 50-50, and the very few couples I know who can do that achieve it because, oftentimes because both parents are working in the home or working out of the home. In my case, it could have been attainable after a certain point if I had really pushed for it. My husband is not averse to the idea of being more involved in. I happen to have a really great husband who's around a lot more now, but I came to see that that I was approaching co-parenting from a very political viewpoint, where I said, well, there has to be absolute equity, and that I could tear everything apart so that I had 50% and he had 50%, but that the much larger question for me now at this point in my life, because we now have a second child who's quite young, is this desirable for me as an individual? Not for me as a woman, not, for me as a wife, but just for me as a person. Is this really what I want right now? Because they're so little, and my time with them is so brief. And if I want him to do 50%, that means that there's 50% that I won't do. And so, we're negotiating, and we're still trying to figure it out. But I think I'm more concerned with balance than I am about equity, which I think is something that all women in my peer group are struggling with. Is there a way to balance our lives, to balance work and family? And this is when Cathi and I really connected on this issue, because at the time we were both in our mid to late 30s and really trying to figure this out. How do we do both without constantly feeling like we're compromising one side or the other?
And that leads to the next question, actually, and I was going to ask you, Cathi, because even though you're not reading, you're so much the glue that holds this together. Your feelings about co-parenting, your feelings about the balance in your life. You talked about that you are at a place now, unlike when you started to think about the book, that is much more comfortable for you.
Well, I feel similarly to Hope. I mean, it was generated in a I would say a low period of my marriage. We had just moved. Our lives were in chaos. We were both trying to set up offices in the home. We didn't have much babysitting yet. Our kids were much younger. They were 4 and 1. I was still nursing the 1-year-old. And my husband had just quit his full-time job, was cut down to half-time so that we could do this co-parenting thing that we'd always envisioned. The reality was that it took a lot of work on both of our parts to get it set up right. And there were a lot of, I had to learn to ask for things. He had to learn to do things that his own father hadn't done. I had to learn to give up things that my mother had done and not feel guilty about it all the time. And I think it's a constant struggle, as you said. I mean, you're trying to find balance. And I think, like Hope, I have come to a place where I've come to accept certain things that I used to think would really bother me. For example, I do most of the cooking because I care more about what the kids are eating and what we're all eating, and my husband doesn't, and he doesn't want to cook, and that's fine. He, fills the cars with gas and changes the tires, which I used to think, oh, of course I'm going to do that. And the truth is, I have, in some ways, a more traditional role than I thought I would, but also, here I am doing all kinds of things for the book, and my husband's taking care of the kids, so you're just constantly juggling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Natalie, you had, when you were talking about, when Hope mentioned she doesn't know too many people who have this parity.
Yeah, well, I can't complain about that. I think my husband does at least half, if not more. It's a personality thing, though. Yeah. He's like, as one of my friends put it, a natural father. And I think it wouldn't have worked for me any other way. I think otherwise I probably just would have, I don't know what. But he's just so, it seems like that's what he wants. I mean, he works at the Washington Post. He's got a hard job, and sometimes he is out late, but he makes up for it in other ways. I mean, it's just really, it's done because we both want to do that. It's not like I have to negotiate with him so much as he just has this personality. I don't know if I think it's completely unusual. I think, in our little community there in Tacoma Park, which is like, the Berkeley of Washington, I think there's this kind of almost fashionableness of being a great involved father. That seems like there's a small community of men for whom that becomes something of a, it's part of their identity. Mm-hmm. Whether it'll ever catch on, I doubt, but...
I was just going to say, is there a clone possibility?
I don't know. I mean, I also, I can't figure out why it doesn't happen more. I mean, as one who's always talking about Darwinism, I can come up with a lot of reasons, but the truth is that you can train a male rat to care for putts.
Yeah,
I mean, you will...
One.
Huh?
One. You can train one.
But I think what we're saying is it's as much, it's not just training the man, it's struggling with your own feelings about, I'm the one that carried the baby, I'm the one that nursed the baby, the baby learned that in the night when it cried, I was the one that fed it. There's a lot of feelings that I didn't anticipate having as a mother. I think if you can work it out, and if you're not conflicted, that's wonderful. And there certainly are marriages where the father does the bulk of the child care and it works out great. And the women don't feel conflicted.
And the whole point is really dealing with the conflict and coming to terms with the balance that's going to work for you in your life at this point, and then reviewing it years from now and saying, does this still work? Is this still a balance that's appropriate? You talked a bit before, Cathi, about, you referenced your mother. And I'd like to ask those of you who spoke about your mothers in your pieces, what your sense was about your mothers as you were writing this. Some of you held your moms on pedestals, some of you did not, some of you referenced a more violent background. You had models that were both positive and negative, some of which you wanted to emulate, some of which you wanted to run away from. How did this writing, how has this changed or in any way affected your sense about your mother in your own life? Any of you? Pam, want to start?
I guess. Get it over with. I think probably one of the reasons I've so valued my freedom is because of my mother, who was not violent, but who told me almost every day, I gave up everything I loved to have you. That was what she said almost every day. And honestly, just recently, 39 years old, 6 years into therapy, I mean, 6 years into good therapy. 20 years into therapy. I sat in my therapist's office and he said, so what were those things she gave up? And I said, well, what were some of the things she loved? And I made this list of the things she loved. And truly, they were the same before me and after me. It was acting, tennis, travel, and vodka. Those were the things she loved. Those were the things she loved more than anything. And she didn't give any of them up. In fact, she didn't really temper her intake of any of them as a result of me.
But you didn't know that till recently.
No, it took me 39 years, 39 and a half years to realize that was true, which in a way has kind of changed a lot of things for me. But I, didn't ever want to say that sentence.
I
You can pass.
She wrote a whole book about her mother
Right.
called Fierce
Fierce
Attachments. It's wonderful. You gotta read it.
Natalie?
Natalie?
Yeah, my mother.
Your glorious mother.
Yeah, I mean, we fight a lot, but I like the fact that I can say anything to her, and that she, I just love being able to say anything to her. And when I see this sort of relationship that, like, my husband has with his mother, where it's always like, hi, how you doing? But, you can never get angry at, and I like being able to get angry. That's sort of the thing I do best. But I think that this thing about mothers, like mothers can't win. It's amazing. Either you're too clinging or you're too, aloof or something. It just seems like mothers, I'm worried about that for myself, of course. I know that Rick is, he's got a free ride. I mean, he's a great dad, but it's amazing how well dads do in their daughter's esteem, no matter what happens. Oh, God. So, but I keep trying, It's so hard because I think your impulse is to reject your mother. I think that's something natural about that, so you have to really kind of think it through.
Well, my mother died 21 years ago, so she's a bit of an archetype to me, or at times even an abstraction, although I've written a lot about her. I think what I discovered writing this essay that was most interesting to me was that I don't think my frustrations are that different from my mother's. I think
Just one of the things.
my mother was a stay-at-home mother who raised 3 children. She stopped working when she became pregnant with me. And the feminine mystique was really about the discrepancy between women's expectations and their desires and their reality, and that there was a gap between the two, and it called attention to that. And I think that among my peer group, the same is true. We just have different expectations, and most of us have a different reality. But that the core issue is the same, is that they're not aligned right now. What became interesting to me was that my response was anger. Well, why did I get angry? I don't remember my mother being angry, but I remember my mother saying things to me like, your father doesn't help enough around the house, or talking about how difficult it was to be a mother. Because the truth is, most women of my generation, especially those of us who came to childbearing later, had a certain amount of control over our lives, or at least the illusion of control over our lives, which pretty much goes out the window when you become a mother, because you have power without actually having control all the time, which can be maddening. And Alyssa Chappelle wrote about that, I thought, very evocatively in this book. But, I got angry, and what did my mother get? I think my mother may have gotten depressed. I think that among her peer group, women drank. They took Valium. They fell into despair. And I was real aware as I was writing this essay that if I hadn't gotten angry, I probably would have felt hopeless about my situation. And that for me was not an option for various reasons. One of them being that now I feel that women have more permission to express anger, that are even encouraged to express their anger. So that was my response a generation later. And I see that as a fundamental difference between the two of us. And it makes me feel a little sad for her, that she really didn't have, that my father was the only one in the house who was allowed to be angry. And in our house, 2 of us are allowed to be angry, me more than him most of the time, not by permission, but that's just personality. But that there's room for that in our household, and that's when I realized how different my life really is from my mother's, although in some respects it is very much the same.
Cathi?
Some similar things. My mother, I think, was the angel in the house. She raised 4 children. She was teaching before she had me and then quit, and my father was a doctor and is a doctor, and she headed the PTA and the Brownie Troop and drove the carpools and volunteered at all the schools and made 3 home-cooked meals a day and baked desserts and took us for our haircuts and waited on my father and did all those things. Now she is 66 and has a thriving full-time career. She was a tough act to follow, and she also is not wired the same way I am. I am wired more like my father, which is moody and irritable, and I'm also, I grew up groomed for a career. I was always ambitious. I went to college and then graduate school and then had a thriving career through my 20s, and suddenly I was 33 with a baby and a husband, and I still needed to make half the income, and I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how, I wanted to do the best for my baby and breastfeed and be there for her, and I married a writer, not a doctor, on purpose, there's a lot of, but the role model for that kind of life I was leading did not exist, and I felt a lot of guilt about it, the things I wasn't doing that she had done.
You spoke about the angel in the house, and in the introduction you talk about the Virginia Woolf. Can we talk a little bit about the title, The Bitch in the House? And obviously it came from the angel in the house, but what some of your responses are, or the responses that you've gotten, and more to the point, how you really feel about this title, what it means to you. Vivian, I'm looking at you.
Okay. I was startled by the title at first, which shows how old I am now. And I was startled. I thought it was vulgar, and I didn't like it. And and it turned out half of Cathy's contributors must have said the same thing to her, but she was stalwart. And I started to think about it afterwards. And this is very much a book of the women of the generation that has come after my own. And it's theirs, and it's the way they feel. And I realized when I was a hot feminist on the barricades 25 years ago, we said many, many things that were considered vulgar, strident, alarming, of a really ugly, narrow, visionary rage. We had no word but pig for men. Pig patriarchy was like damn Yankees. It was one word. And we said many terrible things all the time, and felt, I myself was responsible for death and destruction at many dinner tables for a very long time, because I wouldn't let anything go. As I said about men. After I became a feminist in the 70s, I never went to dinner that I didn't feel compulsively aware of all the little murders of the soul that were going on beneath the surface of these conversations. And I would let nothing go, nothing. So The Bitch in the House is an indication of the fact that what we are involved in is a long historical process of change. It is not a thing that can take place overnight. And in a certain sense, I'm always startled by women of 40 and 30 and 20 who are amazed at what has happened, right? And in another sense, of course, it reassures. And I know that it's a long socializing process that we're going through. Because when we opened our mouths 25, 30 years ago, it was as if we thought, well, tomorrow the revolution, right? Tomorrow, today we see it, and tomorrow hundreds will see it, and the day after that millions will see it, and the world has changed. And because I am a child of the left, I'm a child of people on the left, I took the long view a lot faster than many of my sisters. I saw that we were involved in changing the emotional habits of thousands of years, that nobody was going, and the words that you spoke, I've just been involved in doing a benefit for a big project I'm involved in trying to have built a senior residence for women and men in the arts in Manhattan. And we put on a benefit, and the producer was a woman about Hope's age and temperament, and she's got a kid and a husband out there in Brooklyn, and she is running around. She's an ardent, wonderful theatrical producer, and she and her husband lived together for 10 years before they got married. They had this child. They have a 3-year-old child, and their lives changed overnight. As soon as the kid was born, all of a sudden he's out, bringing in the money, and she never knew how it happened. All of a sudden she's home with the kid, and she said to me not too long ago, in the same rage, I never dreamed that my life would resemble my mother's as much as it does, and I don't know how to get out of it, and he doesn't know how to get out of it, and we're going to a marriage counselor, and we're caught in history. But the thing is, if you take the historical view, which the bitch in the house is trying to do, it's comforting. It should be comforting to take this long view and realize it's a long, long piece of history to become. Nothing is more, what I've learned is it's existential terror. Nothing is more feared than the equality between men and women. I truly believe that. I believe it touches places in the common psyche, in the psyche of culture and politics and history and ourselves. The anxieties are up to the hairline, that we do as well as we have made a revolution as far as I'm concerned, that this is, and I'm proud now to be, that Cathi persuaded me to take my part as the elder stateswoman in this group, because it's really it's the way to see it, that it's a long, slow process. And every day of your life, every day that you have any one of these insights, you make it get better. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm on the barricades. Thank
you. Natalie, you had something.
Yeah, well, I
to
just
add.
wanted to add that, as much as we all might want to think this is going to end, it won't. I think that that the battle between the sexes, I hate that term, but there's a reality to it. And from an evolutionary perspective, I mean, males and females are always going to battle over who owns the rights to the future being the female body, until we sort of figure out how to do it just entirely in a dish. But in the meantime, it's always going to be there, and it's going to be a push me, pull you. And if you ever get complacent, I think that it starts, I think one reason why the feminist movement arose recently when it did was because things had gotten much too extreme in the other direction. Mm-hmm. And there's just, right. It is the classic arms race, and it's always going to be there. Now, is that bad? Well, that's sort of part of life, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't think we can ever say, oh, finally we've solved all the problems. That's not the way nature works.
Well, not solve all the problems, but I hope we can reach a state where the definition of a human being is not determined by whether one is a female human being or a male human being. All we're trying to do is bring social equality, to see human being as a person first, and a person in the world, as you said yourself, the last phrase of your own piece was that your daughter should be a citizen of the world, right, rather than a woman first or a man first, right? Is that not what our hope is? I don't see why that is not a struggle that could conceivably gain more territory than it has now. All these struggles, for instance, that you're involved in with raising a kid, 30 years ago, we all went to print and said, what we want to see is all men and women sharing the social task of raising children. Then let that become a primary value. Then let the chips fall where they may. Then let society form itself around that decision taken, so that it becomes gender blind, so that indeed it becomes a matter of personality and temperament. Who stays home? Who goes out in the world? Who does this? Who mothers or I've known many men who are much better mothers than I ever would have been, ever. And I was married twice, and both times I wanted only to be out in the world, and each of my husbands wanted only to be at home making the yogurt or something. I don't know what. But it would have worked if we'd known ourselves better. I don't know. But the fact is, these were our temperaments.
Pam is going to comment on this too, and then we're going to open the floor for the few minutes that we have left to questions.
Well, just briefly, I liked the title from the beginning, and I I take pleasure in thinking of myself as a bitch, among other things, But the part of the title that appealed to me was really the subtitle. And when Cathi first called me, she told me the subtitle, 26 Women Tell the Truth About, and then the list of things. And I find that in my life more than the male-female conflict, this aversion to the truth. Mm-hmm. And so I guess one of the reasons I said yes was someone said, go ahead, go ahead and tell the truth. Because so often I find myself with an audience saying, you can't say that about your father, or you can't say that about, and I think, well, no, you can't, You can't say that about your father, but I can say it about mine. So that was the part of the title that appealed to me.
Mm-hmm. And I should just add to that I find that not so often, but periodically in this whole process, people challenge me about the book being whiny. And first of all, it's almost always people who haven't read the book yet. But I think that for me, if you consider the truth whiny, it's women speaking honestly about their issues, and women of all ages and all situations, all economic situations and otherwise. I guess somebody to me who considers that whiny
Hasn't read it.
finish that sentence for me.
Just to pick up what Pam said, there's a sense of not relying on someone else's self-knowledge of you, or the self-knowledge that you were raised with, that you are this person's son, daughter, whatever, brother, sister, but that you really come to know who you are by coming to terms with the truths that are right for you at this particular time in your life. And after 20 years of therapy, 6 which were good, thank God, or whatever it is, that you do have your own self-definition, and you kind of evolve as you live your life. Thank you very, very much. I don't know how we're going to get the questions since I can't see a thing.
There
thank
we
you. I'd like to take a few questions, and if you don't mind to raise your hands, and hopefully I'll be able to. Yes, there's a person in the back with her hand up, and you'll need to speak quite loudly, and you do that. This is Pam, Vivian.
Did it ever seem to you something that you felt you had to do to have a child so that...
That's not a question I answer. No.
Because
No.
it seems striking.
That's not my bag. Yeah, no.
Yeah. So I guess that's just a comment I wanted to make, was that I do think you're going to have a whole next generation very possible.
Thank you. Yes.
No one talked about the advantage for the children to have co-parenting. How wonderful for a child to have two parents really know you and take care of you and love you. And as a mother's daughter, I think what an advantage to have a father that knows you and can take care of you and be your mother.
Thank you. I agree, and one of the many reasons that I chose my husband was because I felt that he would be very committed to the children. And one of my fears as a motherless daughter is that I'll also die young, and that my children will not know their father, and that they'll be in the position that I and my siblings were in. So that's one of the very strong emotional reasons behind my push for co-parenting. In addition to all the other reasons that we discussed here today, there is that very I have that personal priority as well. And they're spending 4 days together now while I'm in New York, so we'll see how it goes.
A couple of other questions? I saw a hand back here. No. Any other questions? Yes, please, the woman in red.
Yes, I come from the generation before the 30-year-old. I come from your generation.
Okay.
And so I couldn't relate so much with this co-parenting and the feminism business because I've always felt independence. I've always worked. I've always had a very satisfying job. I had 2 children and I had nannies and I had people to care them for me. I hear today I have grandchildren. They live in Brussels and I go there as much as possible to see them. And my daughter is enjoying being a mother and taking care of them. And just everything she we speak every day on the phone and she tells me about them. And she's like the mother that
What is your point?
my point is that I related much more to you, Vivian.
Me?
Yes, because of
How'd you get there? You're a mother, she's a mother, everybody's a happy mother. What are you talking about? Oh, now we're getting to it. She wants me to get her a man. You should stop her. Tell her. Don't let her go on. Girls? Oh, man.
What is your question?
She wants to know what we girls.
Wait, what's your question?
Oh, this is pathetic.
What is your question?
Stop her. Wait, are you
But what is your question?
You're laughing at me.
Why what?
This feeling of being feminist and that you
Aye.
you had such pain in what you were going through. I don't quite understand it.
You know, I think that for the purposes of this discussion, it seems to me that your question is about why are you a feminist?
Yes.
And
No, why are
Okay,
we
but-
conflicted? Why are the mothers among us conflicted? Why aren't we just? Well, I guess that's a good question. If you don't feel conflicted, more power to you. I think once you have a child, for me, it made me conflicted. I feel very strongly about my work, and I feel very strongly about my children, and I want to do both now. So,
Could I
many of the people in the book talk about balance, and I think that the conflict that so many women experience is not being able to be present at each of their roles and to be able to do what they want to do with a total commitment and a sense that they're not missing out on something, or they're doing this but they're not doing that, and that we need to be able to feel as comfortable as we can be doing what we want and need to do. And each of us comes to this from a very different background and a very different point of view. And I thought your question was, why are we feminists? But I see that that's not your question.
Gail, could I add something
yeah.
to that? I think, and when Vivian was speaking before, I realized that I think that for me and for many of my peers or women of my generation, we felt that the revolution had already happened, in a sense. We felt that we were sort of going to reap the benefits of all of the sisters that came before us, and the reality that we found is that there's still a lot of struggle and there's still a lot of conflict that we need to go through, because that's how evolution is going to continue. It is a long process. And if there's struggle in my individual household, that's still a part of the process. And part of the beauty of the book, I think, is that women are talking honestly about these struggles and these conflicts, and that will be part of the larger evolution, that we're taking the micro, 26 stories of the micro, in hopes that it will somehow affect the macro.
Just very quickly, I want to say that, one of the problems is the way we structure this. There's a lot of evidence that humans evolved to be sort of raising their kids in a more or less cooperative breeding. I don't mean by that a kibbutz necessarily, but I do mean that you don't just do it yourself, and women have never done it themselves, and they've always solicited help from multiple people, including, I might add, grandmothers, senior females, who, I see as the great unused force in this whole system. But I think that we're feeling guilty for the wrong, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to be raising our kids this way. It's just, it's completely out of sync with the needs of the child and the mother. I mean, mothers have ambitions for reasons that I won't go into, but I think if we just sort of accept that having childcare, having a good nanny, having all of these things contributing is actually all over the world. That's how people do it in traditional foraging societies. That's how they do it.
And the whole issue of support and where you get your support and what you feel is supportive for you. We have,
Has had her hair
Yes.
for a long time.
the woman in the middle?
Yeah.
Having trouble, yes.
I just have one statement. I know it's shows what it's nightmare. I'm not going to answer the question. As somebody who has read this book more than once, I can tell you it's not whiny. It is quite brilliant. But more to the point, I want you all to know, it's not just about the conflict of motherhood.
Right.
It's about being a woman in today's world. There are many essays and many things which have nothing to do with motherhood, but it's all about the role of women and women wanting to be themselves. And I think it's really important that everyone knows that's my role.
Thank you. I am getting a sign, and the sign is saying that we need to end. There are going to be books for sale in the back of this room, and I thank you for your attention, and I very much thank our panelists.
Not enough, obviously. I can't get my way.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.